Hi, this is Lili Sanderson, and you're listening to Choosing Glory. Thank you for joining me for, part 2 of sections 58 and 59 of the Doctrine and Covenants. And we are going to pick up where we left off with David McCullough's description of the Missouri Territory. Now, he's talking about the Truman family, Harry S. Truman's ancestors, who came in with a lot of the Kentuckians in later years than the Saints were there, but it does describe the territory in kind of a beautiful way, and it kind of leads into some of the things I wanted to share about what the church is doing now, or has been doing in recent decades, to follow the commands of Section 58 and purchase territory in this area. So anyway, we talked about the soil is great, the pastures, the hardwoods. Continuing with that description, to cut through sod with a plow took 6 to 8 yoke of oxen. What does that mean? That means it was tough work to get through the crust of the soil. Like, it was difficult, and it required the strength of 6 to 8 oxen to pull a plow through that sod. That's a lot of strength to cut through that crust. And he mentions that horses couldn't do it. They just didn't have the power. Horses are strong animals, but this required oxen and 6 to 8 hooked to the plow. But beneath the crust, the dark prairie loam could be 2 to 6 feet deep. That's extraordinary. In places along the river bottoms, it was 20 feet deep. The rich and beautiful uplands in the vicinity of Independence might well be denominated the garden spot of the far west. Like, that's, again, it's just so tangible and concrete. When God says it's a garden, it's a garden. It will grow things. That nutritious soil that goes 2 to 6 feet deep by the river bottoms could be up to 20 feet deep. I mean, that's crazy. I don't know if you've heard this, and I didn't even bother to look it up, but I'm sure it's verifiable because I heard it from a reputable source. It was a World War II historian that talked about Ukrainian soil. Ukraine is a breadbasket and grows all kinds of things. Of course, right now, that poor country is war-torn. And again, I hope our hearts and prayers go out to those people and all people who are struggling because of war or evil in our last days of the last days. But I remember hearing, I think it was Victor Davis Hanson, but I can't verify that right now, who said that the Germans, the Nazis, when they had taken over that territory for a while in World War II, loaded up train cars of Ukrainian soil to ship it back by train to Germany because the soil was so fertile. And not everybody or every place has soil that will grow things in such abundance and richness without having to do constant work and amendments. I mean, you have to be careful and take care of your soil, and you can deplete it. But like in Utah, we have so many areas of sandy soil. Draper, that's what we've got here. So, we wanted to grow a garden. We had to put all kinds of additives and bring in good soil and whatever. Otherwise, we didn't really expect things to grow very well. And that's sort of a constant issue for people who grow things. So anyway, Ukraine has been blessed with that in some areas to the point where it was taken by the Sons of Guns who invaded that country in World War II. And I mean, it's still left plenty because Ukraine has grown lots of things historically, certainly even since World War II. But Missouri was like that. Missouri has this rich soil. Well, of course it does. It was the Garden of Eden. And Daniel Boone's son refers to it as the New Eden, and it draws all these settlers because they're like, oh my goodness, you got to have abundant natural resources if you're going to prosper. You got to feed people. You got to build things. You got to be able to grow stuff. Okay, let's go on a little bit more from David McCullough's book. Much of the best land, it happens, was already under cultivation. Moreover, it had been violently contested when a decade earlier the garden spot had been the settling for what were politely referred to as the Mormon difficulties, quote unquote. So the Mormon settlers had a difficult time from the beginning, and part of it was because this was a very prized resource. The soil itself, the hardwoods, the rivers, the creeks. Like it was this abundantly blessed land that will be the new Jerusalem, will be the new Zion. Go figure. Of course it makes sense, right? But anyway, the Mormon difficulties had been, as he says, the things politely referred to as the Mormon difficulties, meaning it was nastiness towards the church members. In 1831, we've just been talking about that, only a few years after the founding of independence, after the city was founded, a small advance party of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints arrived on the scene and were at first regarded by the local citizenry as little more than harmless fanatics. So at first, in the first year or two, it was like, they're just religious fanatics, not a big deal. But more followed, meaning more settlers followed that were members of our church. They bought land. Again, they're trying to follow the laws. They bought land, they founded a settlement and a ferry crossing on Blue River, opened their own general store in Independence, and established the town's first newspaper. Some began speaking out against slavery. And that became a real flashpoint with a lot of the local settlers that were pro-slavery. So that, anyway, was part of the problem, but also the problem that saints had often was that wherever they went, they prospered because they worked hard and they were blessed. So even though there was great sacrifice involved in all of it, and certainly a lot of hard work, the Lord did bless their efforts, and they started to do things like establishing stores and newspapers, and more people came, and they're, having children and developing the area. And that became, again, a flashpoint for people who thought differently, certainly those who were against slavery. And as McCullough ends up here, in little time, they were seen as a threat. So interesting that this is chronicled in lots of places, how rich the land is and how much trouble there was for the early members of our church that were trying to settle there and eventually get chased out in very brutal ways. The Missouri years are tough years, and there is a lot of injury to the saints, and some die, and some are assaulted and hurt in many ways, and certainly property is seized and in illegal ways. So eventually they have to abandon their plans to build Zion. But the leaders of our church don't forget things like this. So they do study scripture, and they do keep track of what the Lord has asked his people to do. Now, as you know, the church is driven out of Missouri, driven out of Nauvoo, and ends up having to go to a place that nobody wants, the Great Salt Lake Desert, which people are skipping right over on their rush to California and Oregon and Washington because those are more fertile areas and seem to be more prosperous, and California has gold. So it's a place nobody wants. But the Lord is always able to prosper his people, and he can make the desert bloom as a rose, which he has done. But that's the only place they could find peace. And even then, they seemed to be a threat as the westward expansion continued, and they were practicing polygamy and all those other things. So because of a lot of political difficulties, and of course they also are having people come from all over, and we talked about the way the Lord helped with the Perpetual Immigration Fund and the ideas of consecration, even when the law couldn't be practiced in totality, that God wanted his people to help the poor. But there were many poor people coming. So it takes a while for that to even out, right? And there were many times in the early decades of the church when the church was broke and didn't have funds. Now, the Lord provides in a multiplicity of ways, but eventually it's Lorenzo Snow's revelation when he was speaking in the St. George Tabernacle. He had not planned to speak on this, but that beautiful video, The Windows of Heaven, you can check it out again on YouTube. I'm sure you can find it. Is really nice about telling how this happened. It was a reaffirmation of the law of the tithe and an emphasis now on, if you're going to be an active member of the church, you need to bring your tithes to the storehouses. And so the church finally gets out of debt and continues in its path of growth and development and so on. And now, of course, they criticize us for this, but we are a wealthy church. And I, for one, am fine with that. I hope that's not a problem for you. people worry that somebody's mishandling the funds of the church. And you know what? If they are, they're going to have to be responsible to God for that. And the day of reckoning will come. I'd leave that in his hands. I'm not worried about that. I'm grateful that the church has prospered in financial terms so that we can build temples all over the world. We can actually work to convert the third world and build chapels in those areas, and that we can do things with the education program of the church, which now provides pathways worldwide. I mean, there are amazing things happening. Of course, the missionary program is an amazing program that takes a lot of subsidy. And anyway, there are a lot of ways that the church does humanitarian work and other things. And again, if the hands that handle those funds are unrighteous or inappropriate, sometimes the Lord will bring a day of reckoning. That's not my business. I don't have to worry about that. I just want to be a full tithe payer and celebrate the fact that the Lord has prospered the work and can do these amazing miracles that will help to bring in the second coming. I'm all in favor of that, and I hope you are too. And as I said, it's interesting because the Catholic Church for so long was one of the wealthiest churches, and now, and I don't wish this on anybody, but is in serious financial trouble from some of their own problems internally, of course, but also just a drop in membership and so on. But okay, let's go on. And what I wanted to say was when the church had the beginnings of financial stability, they pursued this focus of purchasing lands in Jackson County. So, as you know, and I'm not giving an up-to-date summary here, but I'm sure you can find it online if you're interested, the church owns a lot of land there. We have Adam-on-Diamond. We recently acquired the Kirtland Temple in a financial transaction with the Church of Christ that used to be the reorganized church. And we don't have the temple lot yet with the center temple location, meaning that, again, Joseph Smith had someone draw up a plat of the city of Zion in Jackson County, and it had a 24 temple complex, 6x4 in a grid, and the main temple is not in our ownership yet as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There is a splinter faction that came off of our church in the days of early apostasy called the Church of Christ Temple Lot that owns that land. And they have been on the record in the past as saying that they'll never sell it to our church, but, never say never. And the Lord will do what the Lord has said he will do. So I don't have any concerns about that. I know the church keeps an eye on those things and tries to have friendly relations with those things. And that was something that I found that was very interesting to me. You can go down a million rabbit holes online, and I went down one this past week that I quite enjoyed. It was a Mormon Studies website held by the University of Virginia. I even had to investigate a little and say, why does the University of Virginia have these documents? Because they have a lot of the David O. McKay diaries, excerpts at least from his diaries, kept by himself, but often by a secretary or an assistant. And as you know, David O. McKay was the prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for about 20 years, ending with his death in 1970. And one of his biographers, whose name, I think I forgot to write it, but it was Gregory Pierce, who wrote a big book on David O. McKay with a co-author, must have gotten help from the University of Virginia, or anyway, had some association on that project. So he donated these diaries to the University of Virginia Mormon Studies, and it's available online. And I spent a long time, I didn't read them all because they're quite plentiful, but I read a lot of them, and I kind of scanned through the whole group of them, and they cover a period of about 1936-ish to about 1970 and the death of David O. McKay. So it's quite a period of time. And what was fascinating is that a lot of this had to do with their interactions with city officials from Independence, Missouri, local leaders about the land. So again, I'm just going to give a very, very small excerpt or kind of a brief summary of some of that content, not even all the content. But I was interested because early on, the church was trying to continue with the commandment of the Lord in section 58 to purchase lands in that land, in that part of the United States, for the New Jerusalem, Adamon, Diamon, etc., and for the temples to come. And it showed interaction. Now, it's interesting, too. This is another little detail. I don't know if you're as interested as I am, but I find it fascinating that Alvin R. Dyer has the distinction of being the only general authority who is ordained to be an apostle in the latter days, but not set apart to be in the quorum of the 12. So he spent a lot of his time as a 70, or an assistant to the 12, they used to call them, and then he is made an apostle, and he is given the position of being a third counselor in the first presidency to David O. McKay. But he's never in the quorum of the 12. And after the death of David O. McKay, Alvin R. Dyer went back to serving in the 70, even though he had the priesthood office of apostle. But his assignment was to the 70, or, as an assistant until the quorums of 70 came. So anyway, I find that fascinating detail. And it seems that one of the reasons that he got that special assignment was because Alvin R. Dyer had been the mission president of the Central States Mission, which included Jackson County, Missouri, and had some associations there that were positive and useful. And so he became one of the liaisons between our church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and the local political leaders of Jackson County. So there's a lot of detail, which I won't go into, but I will share a little. For instance, back in 1950, they wanted to build another high school in Independence, and the church owned part of what will be that 24 temple complex. Not all of it, but part of it. And it was vacant, so it had been used as occasional traveling circus grounds for the circus to set up, or for football practices, or other kinds of things like that, where it was undeveloped land that was sort of available for some community use without any problems on the part of the church. But then the city wanted to build a high school on it. Now, you put a high school that the city has invested money in, and now you got all these students getting their education there or whatever. That could be a problem if the church wanted to develop the land later. So there was communication between the city officials of Independence and the church, and Alvin R. Dyer was a big part of that stuff. And he helps to prioritize the church maintaining undisputed ownership of that land, because you know how governments are. They can use that law of eminent domain, meaning we need this for the good of the city. So even though they still have to sort of reimburse people for taking their land, they get to take their land. They get a priority position in acquiring land if they need to put a road through or a school. And the church didn't want to get into that kind of conflict, so they negotiated, and the church leadership, First Presidency, authorized giving a donation of approximately, the funds seem to vary, but $50,000 to $65,000 to the city of Independence to acquire a different property and to contribute toward the building of a high school in another location. So it's like, hey, we don't want to be your enemies, and so we're not going to get into a tussle over whether or not you build here, but we don't want you to build here. So we're going to make this generous contribution so that you can build somewhere else. Even though we're not selling you anything, we're just going to make this contribution to the city of Independence so that you'll leave our land alone. And that was successful, and there was some very positive correspondence between the city officials and the church. And then later, that was another impetus that Alvin R. Dyer was a part of to build the Independence Visitor Center, because at some point it was like other groups want this land, and they're going to again try to use things like eminent domain to force a sale of this part of the temple complex that we own to the city. So let's not let that happen, and it'll only be really safe if we build something on it ourselves and invest in the development of this particular parcel. So that's where the Independence Visitor Center is. And as I've mentioned before, the building of the Independence Visitor Center is on lot 13 of the 24 temple complex. The Visitor Center is the 13th, designated number 13 of those 24 temples. And in the correspondence here, or in the diary of David O. McKay, it shows that they talked about the dimensions of the Independence Visitor Center. Okay, I'm not going to check this, but I think it was 87 by 61 feet, because that was designated on the plat that Joseph Smith had drawn of the temple complex, that the buildings would be that dimension, those dimensions. And they followed those dimensions. So again, we could designate that a temple at any point and dedicate it. And with very minor modifications that are pretty easy these days, we would have a temple in Independence. It wouldn't be the center temple, but it would be a temple in Independence. Anyway, things can happen fast when the Lord wants them to happen. But all of this is to say that how were these things on the forefront of a very busy church with a huge missionary program during this time and trying to build and, start growing into a worldwide church? It's because the prophets always have Zion in their vision. They always do. And so should we. We need to keep Zion in our vision. I want you to think about this Hugh Nibley statement that says something beautiful about how the Latter-day Saints will see Zion as soon as they stop seeking for Babylon. It's a nice summary our Brother Nibley gives us. As soon as we stop chasing Babylon, as soon as we stop seeking the world, Zion can come into our view. And we can become these Zion-ready individuals that we've been talking about. We can prepare for the coming of the Lord. Okay, I'm going to come back at the very end of part 2 here with just another little Zion thought or two. But first, just a couple of current events or updates. I don't know how current these are, but given that Memorial Day was just yesterday, I wanted to share just some beautiful things about remembering those who have given their lives to preserve freedom in all of our free lands. As we say, or should remember, freedom is not free. And people have historically given their lives. We see this in Scripture. The people who fought for their freedoms, their homes in the Book of Mormon, people who fought to preserve their religious liberties throughout the history of mankind. It's not without incredible sacrifice that these things are done. And it's been our privilege as a couple. And, even my parents visited some places like this when I was growing up and traveling with them and my sisters. We would see military cemeteries and felt that same feeling even as a young person, that I was treading on sacred ground. And that feeling has only grown as I've had opportunities to understand more about what was given in those incredible sacrifices by those incredible people. And I know women have died too, but let's face it, brothers and sisters, it is mostly good men. Women could not defend freedom in the same way that men do. And they are given that gift of strength and upper body ability and all kinds of strengths and testosterone that work to bless their communities when they focus on righteous goals. And I am grateful every day for the good men who have been and are in my life and will always be a part of my eternity. So grateful. Please take a moment when we have the opportunity to remember these good men. And I know some of you have lost family members because of this, and it's sacred stuff. So I just couldn't help myself. I'm going to read the whole Gettysburg Address, which is a relatively short address. I know many of you have it memorized, but it's beautiful language, and I think it's appropriate. This was given in Pennsylvania on a part of the Gettysburg battlefield, which is a very large area. If you have a chance to go and visit that place, it is sacred ground. I loved the time we were able to spend there with a tour guide so that we could get a sense of some of the incredible things that were done there. It's hallowed, certainly. This was on November 19th, 1863, if I remember correctly. William Jennings Bryant, who was a prominent orator of the day and considered to have a golden tongue, gave a speech that lasted over an hour. And I'm sure was very eloquent, but that's not the one that we remember. We remember this short speech given by that amazing man and president, Abraham Lincoln. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And of course, that was an inspired Constitution, an inspired Declaration of Independence that declared those truths to be self-evident. Continuing with this speech, now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here. Well, in that, Abraham Lincoln was wrong, because this speech is one of those that lives forever in the minds and hearts of good people. So let me start that sentence again. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Well, may it be so. And then I was, reminded as I was reading that beautiful address of another tender writing of Abraham Lincoln to a Mrs. Lydia Bixby, who with her husband Cromwell had raised a family of 6 sons and 3 daughters, so a large family. Her husband Cromwell had died before the Civil War, but during the war, her sons fought for the North, and it was reported to Abraham Lincoln that 5 of her 6 sons had died in the war for the Northern cause, for the preservation of the Union. Now, subsequent histories have said that there were some errors of bookkeeping there, and that it may be that they know that at least 2 sons survived, so they think that 3 sons definitely were killed in the Civil War. Could have been 4, but it seems as if it might have been 3, which is still an incredible price for a family to pay. But at any rate, under the understanding that she had lost 5 sons, Abraham Lincoln wrote this letter. Dear Madam, I have been shown in the files of the War Department a statement of the Adjutant General of Massachusetts that you are the mother of 5 sons who have died gloriously on the field of battle. I feel how weak and fruitless must be any words of mine which should attempt to beguile you from the grief of a loss so overwhelming. But I cannot refrain from tendering to you the consolation that may be found in the thanks of the Republic they died to save. I pray that our Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement and leave you only the cherished memory of the loved and lost, and the solemn pride that must be yours to have laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom. Yours very sincerely and respectfully, A. Lincoln. Beautiful words and a touching acknowledgement, although words, of course, can never capture the emotion of these incredible sacrifices, but an attempt to acknowledge the incredible sacrifice that not just men, but their families make. And may we be respectful of that, and may we raise our children with a love of freedom, and hope that it will never come to their needing to lay this cost, or lay this price on the altar themselves or for their families, but knowing that sometimes it happens and it still happens today. And I do thank God for all good men and all their families that support them, their wives and children, and my heart goes out to all the Gold Star families of every country. I hope that we do remember them, and when we have an opportunity to tread on the sacred ground in those burial fields of any country. Chris and I even were able to go and see some of the military cemeteries in Australia on Anzac Day, which is the Australian-New Zealand Army Corps Day of Remembrance. And it was so touching, and I was so grateful for all the marks of reverence and observance that were given in that country on that day, which I felt, at least at that time, were exceeding the shows of reverence given in the United States for a time, and we've gone through our ebbs and flows of patriotism, but this is not excusable to forget those who have paid the price for freedom. Just a couple of other things. I wanted to share something that somebody sent in as a podcast listener, a message. I'm changing the tone here completely, so forgive me. I'm going to jump around just as I finish today. This was something that I had not heard before. So since I've been talking about Pope Leo XIV, who is the newly designated Pope for the Catholic Church, a listener who goes online by the name of Gracie Lou Freebush, any of you who've watched Miss Congeniality will remember that name, so that was pretty cute, sent this in. And I did check it and definitely saw some other articles on this. On December 17th, 2023, a lightning strike damaged the statue of St. Peter located on the facade of the Sanctuary of Our Lady of the Rosary of San Nicolas in Argentina. Now, we talked about that, right? How Peter is often depicted holding a key or keys because Christ gave him the keys to the kingdom, as they say. And anyway, that's supposed to be where the Catholic Church gets its claim to authority. So this was back in 23, December 17th, 23, a lightning strike damages the statue of St. Peter, the lightning removed the key and the halo of that depiction of St. Peter. The event occurred on Pope Francis's birthday, who was then the Pope, which was December 17th, and the day before the publication of the Fiducia Supplicans, forgive my pronunciation, which was a declaration opening up blessings for gay couples in the Catholic Church. So anyway, kind of an interesting timing, removing the key and the halo from the statue of St. Peter in front of that cathedral in Argentina. Now, this new Pope, Leo XIV, says that family is between a man and a woman, and he did assert the dignity of the unborn, and the elderly. So he is making statements right now that are fairly conservative in terms of saying marriage still is between a man and a woman as far as the Catholic Church is concerned, and they're still anti-abortion and against euthanasia for the elderly. So good for him. Have to be glad about that. I'm just going to close. My pages are a little bit messed up here, but to go back to the idea of Zion being in our vision, and let's kind of keep our Brother Nibley's words in mind that when we stop seeking Babylon, we can have a vision of Zion. We have some beautiful hymns about that. Israel, Israel, God is calling. I'm not going to read the words here. That's one that sometimes we sing in church, or I hope we do, but check out the words. It's about gathering to Zion in the last days, which will be a refuge. And then this hymn, which I think is not often sung, at least not in the wards I've been in, but I think we have sung it once or twice, and I know the words and the music, so I hear the music as I say these words. I hope you'll go and check it out because Think about having the vision of Zion. Think about how all our leaders have never forgotten the command to purchase lands in Independence, Missouri, and in Jackson County so that we can prepare. God is concrete. He wants us following the mandates that he has given so that we can have the blessings. And if we ignore those things, we do it to our own peril. So how wonderful that this vision of Zion has always been in a view of our prophets, and may it be in our view also. Here's the hymn: beautiful Zion built above, beautiful city that I love, beautiful gates of pearly white, beautiful temple, God is light. He who was slain on Calvary opens those pearly gates for me. I'm going to skip the chorus. Verse 2, beautiful heaven where all is light, beautiful angels clothed in white. Think of the reunions to come. I do, and I long for them. Beautiful strains that never tire, beautiful harps through all the choir. There shall I join the chorus sweet, worshiping at the Savior's feet. Last verse, beautiful crowns on every brow, beautiful palms the conquerors show, beautiful robes the ransomed wear, beautiful all who enter there. Thither I press with eager feet. There shall my rest be long and sweet. And now the chorus, Zion, Zion, lovely Zion, beautiful Zion, Zion, city of our God. It's coming, brothers and sisters. Let's get Zion ready. Let's choose celestial law and celestial glory and be prepared when the call comes to build, whether we're in the center part of Zion in Jackson County or in the Zion satellites. We can be a part of this by being Zion ready now. As ever, my deepest thanks to my husband, Chris Anderson, and Doug Larson of Point Digital. Take care.